Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL Spring Split Last Chance Qualifier overview and analysis video. We have 4 teams to talk about here today. We already know the majority of Group Ascend and Group Nirvana, but the 4 teams that got 3rd place in their individual groups will duke it out in a double elimination tournament here to determine which 2 of them are going to rise to Group Ascend and which 2 will fall to Group Nirvana. Of course, we'll preview all that at the end, but I'm so excited to go over this little mini tournament. It was actually really interesting to watch these games because these are definitely some of the higher profile games that these teams have had to play all year long. You know, these are not teams that are expected to be, big playoff contenders or, big actual MSI threats or anything like that. But getting into Group Ascend is a pretty big advantage for a team because it guarantees you at the very least a play-in spot to get into the playoffs. You would have to earn that in Group Nirvana, but you're guaranteed that even if you don't win a single game in Group Ascend. So a lot on the line for both of these teams. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. Let me know what you thought was going to happen down in the comment section below. Which teams overperformed or underperformed your expectations? Always curious to hear your thoughts and opinions on that down in the comments. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover. And at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. I guess technically like a player of the tournament and a dud of the tournament, this little mini 4-team, last chance qualifier tournament. We will be talking about Group Ascend and Group Nirvana at the end of this video, kind of previewing where I think a lot of the teams ended up landing after this tournament, but for the most part, we're going to be covering the series that we got in this little mini tournament, like I said. So without further ado, let's jump into it. The first round between these teams obviously was a best of 1, and then everything after the upper bracket, like round 1, was a best of 3, and so we'll cover our best of 1s first, and then we'll jump into the 3 best of 3s that came after, again, to determine the 2 teams that end up qualifying up and the 2 teams that end up, unfortunately, moving down. So our first matchup, to me, was a matchup between what I expected to be the 2 best teams in this tournament, and it didn't quite play out like that. One of these teams was definitely better than the other. It was FunPlus Phoenix taking on LGD Gaming, and FPX was able to pick up the win here, and they did it pretty convincingly. They were definitely the better of these 2 teams, and like I said, I expected these 2 teams to be the 2 best in this tournament. I'm really not a fan of WE. Anybody who's followed the channel knows that I don't really believe in them all that much, and Ultra Prime, I think, struggled a lot more than I wanted to see them struggle in the back half of that, I guess preliminary stage, the group stage, if you will. And so for these 2 teams coming in, I think both of them really wanted to win this game. FPX, unfortunately, for LGD, was the better team and was the one to be able to control a lot of the tempo in the early game. But this is just a really good draft from the side of FPX. I think it gives you a lot of options, and LGD just didn't have the firepower to be able to keep up. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game is pretty up in the air for me. I think this was more of a team effort than it was anything else. 2 players in particular really stood out. Sheer and Jway, obviously kind of the young guns, the players that were really looking to kind of level up and, really continue to get better, I think is the best way to put it here for FPX. They both played really well in such an important game. Jway is going to get player of the game for me, but again, if you wanted to give this to Sheer on the top side, I think that's entirely up to you. Gwen continues to look dominant, but I was really impressed with the creation opportunities that Jway was able to create, quite frankly, for FPX. Assume really benefited a lot from having a Nautilus that was really aggro and positioning like he was in an advantageous state basically throughout the entirety of the game, regardless of what the enemy team was doing. There were multiple moments when, Rel or Talia or Jax were too far forward, and Jway was never scared to try and pull the trigger and, create that opportunity to be able to take advantage of that, which is obviously really impressive. But when you're looking for a damage carry this game, it was pretty obviously Sheer on the top side. I think Sheer is really good. I've been emboldened by his spring split so far to say that he is one of the more interesting top laners in the entire league. I think he could grow into being a top 4, top 5 top laner, like as soon as the end of this year, quite frankly, if he were to continue on this trajectory. He is just so consistent at being able to beat up on top laners that are not as good as him. Saucy is obviously a very feast or famine player. We've seen both good and bad out of Saucy already at the LPL level, but Sheer was absolutely better here in a game that he needed to be in. And quite frankly, Sheer has been this team's best player over the course of this year. So I'm excited to see that continue in the best of 1. Shadow was really solid here on the Xin Zhao. This is not a champion I'm always the most in favor of, but he definitely did a good job. Climber was okay on the other side as well. Him and Xiaoya were probably the only 2 players even attempting to do anything for LGD throughout a majority of this game, but, we'll get to them when we get to them. Karin, assume we're fine. Kair absolutely played his role and did his job on the Galio. I'm not gonna, resent him for not being the most aggressive in the world when you have a Nautilus that's out there as a playmaker, and Gwen and Misfortune as primary damage dealers. Galio's job is to make sure that everybody stays safe, that the MF can get the bullet time off, and that's exactly what Kara was able to do here. And then, like I said, Assume was kind of the follow-up. That bullet time was absolutely shredding through people. Yet another example of Misfortune being a really valuable champion at this level, despite what Reddit wants to tell you. So really nice win overall for FPX. Again, it's pretty big to win these best of ones in round number 1. It means you kind of have that extra life going into that do or die best of 3 series. You don't have that if you lose this. LGD, we'll talk about it in a second, but they go down to the lower bracket now. They have to win the next best of 3 or they're done. FPX is now guaranteed at least 2 more, or I guess at least 1 loss in a best of 3 if they need it. So definitely an advantage there for FPX to pick this up, but LGD just did not look good in this game. There's really not a lot else to talk about. You can kind of point to a little bit of everybody in terms of the underperformances. There was a pretty big support gap here between Jway and YCX, but I think that had more to do with Jway being really good rather than YCX being really bad. My dud of the game is going to go to Zhao Qinghua in the mid lane on the Talia. Man, that champion is really, really good, and he did absolutely nothing on it throughout the entirety of this game. Just inactive in the mid game, stepping too far forward in the late game, just not really being a positive. I get that you can't take advantage of the Galio nearly as much as you can some other champions because his laning phase is basically unpunishable, and he can follow a lot of your roams with ult once you hit level 6. Like, I get that that's not a good matchup for Talia, but still, you gotta be able to do something on the map, and Zhao Qinghua just was not impressive to me in that regard. Sassy also just got beat on the top side. Jax has not been a successful champion globally at all in 2025. I think that's been a little bit of a shock to me. This champ has just not worked in any region. I think it's because he doesn't really have a super defined role once, you know, something like Otacon or Baron ends up spawning. Like, you'd love to split push for victories right now, but it's just a lot more difficult to do that when objectives mean more than they ever have before, and I think Sassy definitely struggled in the 1v1, which created, you know, opportunities for Sheer to just be more aggressive in the back half of the game. Climber and Xiaoya weren't awful. Xiaoya was super scared, super passive, was basically not even trying to make any sort of plays this game. It makes sense. He's on Ezreal and the rest of his team is losing. Climber was at least trying to do things on the Vi and was trying to create in the mid game, but only so much he can do in general. LGD just generally was a bit outclassed in this one, and like I said, now they're moving down into the lower part of this bracket, and if you lose a best of 3, you only get 1 shot from this point onwards. You've expended your extra life in a best of 1, which is really not an ideal place to be, but this is a really nice win for FPX. I think they're the best team in this tournament. I said that going into it. I think that was kind of proven by this win here, and I would expect them to keep this good form up. But then moving on to our second best of 1 here of round number 1, and these two teams definitely both had something to prove to me, and one definitely did. It was Ultra Prime taking on Team WE, and Ultra Prime picks up the very dominant win, and they weren't only dominant in their victory. Look at this draft from Ultra Prime. This has to be the most cracked draft we've seen in the LPL. Obviously, we've seen some Zed pop-offs at first stand already. Somebody's already broken the seal of Zed coming through at the international stage, and so it's not quite as flashy now that Saber has brought it out, but Naafiri, Zed, Kai'Sa as like the core of your draft here for Ultra Prime is absolutely insane, and it's even more insane that they absolutely decimated this game. Like, I get that this is a snowball comp. If you win early, you're just going to obliterate the rest of this game if you get any sort of gold. There's no way they ever are going to be able to tank up all of the damage that you have on your side, but man, is this a risky draft to pull out in a best of 1, and Ultra Prime definitely made it work. For WE on the other side, it was not very good. This is the first loss in the LPL for Gwen across the spring split. It was something that a lot of people were talking about how Gwen was basically unstoppable and there was no way that she was going to be able to be taken down, how that champion had obviously succeeded individually so much in terms of the leads that she's been able to generate in the 1v1s, but leave it to Cube and leave it to WE to kind of tear apart 100% win rate for anything, so not a great game for WE. They moved down to the lower part of the bracket, but let's talk about Ultra Prime, and let's talk about my player of the game, Junhao, on the Naafiri. Obviously, he was the first player to really pull out the Naafiri in Pro Play. We've seen it really adapted, and obviously a lot of players were prepping for it. Kanavi would have done it first if he had played on an earlier day, but he didn't towards the second half of the week, and Junhao was the one to kind of debut it international, or I guess at a domestic level, and you know what? Junhao continues to look really good now that Naafiri is meta. Now, I'm not going to say that that's entirely it, because we've seen him on other champions so far in the spring split, and he has generally just looked so much better. Like, the night and day difference between what he was in winter and what he was in spring is really astounding. I think he has gotten significantly more comfortable. I don't know if that's the addition of Xiaosha in the support position, you know, his former teammate coming in, or if it's just him getting more comfortable playing at this level, and now he's playing, you know, players like Monkey and, you know, not necessarily the top-end dogs in the LPL. Like, I don't really know what it is with Junhao, but he has been much better over spring. One of the more valuable players players in terms of the lower half of the standings so far, and hopefully he's going to be able to keep that up. But how do you not also talk about Saber when it comes to this game on the Zed? He completely outplays Karis. Karis has no way to deal with the Zed on the Taliyah throughout basically any of this game. Not only is Saber like first to move around the map, which is a nightmare for Taliyah, but he is like in kill range 100% of the time. The moment that Zed starts getting gold and starts snowballing, he's basically impossible to stop. This champion does so much, and look at the dive threat on Ultra Prime. Obviously with Wacko on Kaisa as well, even Xiaoxia on the Alistar. You have so many different ways to punish a, Taliyah or an Ezreal that's left alone under tower. There's really no way for them to be able to survive a lot of these instances, and a lot of that is just, really good early game pathing and really good early game play coming in from Ultra Prime. So jungle mid definitely standing out, and they've definitely been the standouts, I would say, so far for Ultra Prime, not only across spring, but across this entire year. But again, you don't want to take anything away from everybody else. Xiaoxia does seem to be finding his rhythm a bit more. He was a little rough in the first couple games that he played in spring, but it does feel like I said, he's found his rhythm. He's found his groove at this level, and he's played a lot better over the past couple of games. Wacko and Jiang are solid. I was expecting Jiang to do a lot more on the top side, especially because I do think that top lane is a very exploitable position, and we're seeing other top laners, even at this level, like take over games. Jiang was a player that I wanted to see kind of make that adjustment. It hasn't necessarily happened yet. I still think he has the mechanical ceiling to be kind of a monster at this level, so we'll see. But right now it's Junhao and Saber that are definitely the main characters, and Xiaoxia that's definitely enabling it. And for WE on the other side, they're just not very good. Like, they got completely surprised in draft by Neferi's at Kaisa, and they did not have an answer to it. There was no way they were going to be able to catch up here. Dud of the game is very obviously going to go to Karis. He was awful on the Taliyah, completely outplayed by Saber in terms of the 1v1 matchup. You can tell he was not prepped and not prepared to face a Zed in this matchup. You can definitely say that that was not something that they probably practiced around in scrims. But Karis is just a very feast or famine player. There were moments where he was important. The fact that they are here in the first place is kind of due to Karis having a pretty decent second half of the placement stage, but he's not a good player. Like, his mechanical ceiling is super low. When he's in a bad matchup, he's not going to be able to do much. And as Taliyah, if you're getting pushed in early on in the game, it's kind of a nightmare. So yeah, Karis is dead of the game. Monkey wasn't very good here, completely out jungled by Junhao. I get that Neferi is super broken, but Monkey had no answer to it, and by this point, you absolutely need to have an answer to it. Cube, like I said, the first player to actually lose on Gwen in the LPL in the spring split. Not a great look. Cube is not a very good player. Taiyun and Vampire weren't particularly effective either on the Ezreal and the Karma. WE is the team I expected to not win in the last chance qualifier. They're like the one team that I'm really not expecting to go up to Group Ascend. Technically anything can happen, but with this loss, I feel even more emboldened to say that. I think they are the weakest team by a considerable margin in the last chance qualifier, and I don't think anything here definitely changed my mind on that front. But credit to Ultra Prime for looking at a best of one and seeing an opportunity to just surprise their opponent with a really crazy draft, and then having the wherewithal to know how to take advantage of it. This was a really good game, a really risky game for Ultra Prime, but the mechanical ceiling shone through, and I'm really excited to see what they do moving forward against FPX. But we won't have to wait long to see what they will do, because the qualification series for the first team to get out of this little mini tournament is already here. It's our first best of 3. It's FunPlus Phoenix taking on Ultra Prime. And FunPlus Phoenix is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. Ultra Prime is going to pick up a Game 2 win, and quite frankly, their Game 2 win was awesome to watch. It was super fun. It might have been the best game of the entire series, but FPX is just a little bit better. Their Game 1, their Game 3, they were pretty dominant. They had a lot of control, and quite frankly, Sheer looks like he is too good to be playing near the bottom of the standings. That really is the takeaway for me. I think Jiang did some okay things, especially in Game 2 on the Camille, where he was awesome, but man, he was completely outclassed at the end of this series in game number 3 on the Renekton when Sheer was completely able to take over on the Kennen. He's going to get player of the series. I didn't think about this too much, and he is a reason why FPX is now moving up to Group Ascend. He is awesome. Like, I know that JDG was a weird team last year, and it was going to be a little bit difficult to try to identify what version of Sheer you were going to get now that he was in a completely different scenario. The guy had never played competitive before last year. He's immediately put on a team that wants to make the World Championships, and they miss out by 1 game, and it's not due to him. He was perfectly fine for that team. In fact, I thought he was better than Flandre for a majority of the year as their starting top laner, but it's kind of the complete opposite effect. He goes over to an FPX team that is completely in flux. Their jungle and bot lane have already changed at the beginning of the year, and it's only spring split, and he's kind of being asked to be the #1 option on a team that isn't particularly consistent, and he steps up to the plate, and he looks really good in this role. He is a really, really solid top laner, and if he's going to be a top 3, top 4 top laner by the end of the year, mechanically speaking, expect to see him on a top team once again, or maybe expect him to see him get FPX back into that conversation. Again, this is an organization that was kind of successful in spite of themselves last year because they had one really good player and a good enough surrounding core in order to make it work. You could have that again here with Sheer in the top lane. I think he is good enough for that. He dominated that game #3 on the Kennen and more than deserved player of the series. But the other players to shout out here, Assume, I think probably just played his best series as a member of FunPlus Phoenix. He was way better than Wacko on the other side of this, a big 80 carry gap in my opinion, specifically on the Misfortune in game #1. Was really impressed with his ability to take over in that position, just like he did in his best of 1 earlier on today against LGD. It was a really good look. KR continues to be more of a facilitator, but did start to match Saber in terms of some of these aggressive picks later on in the game. We'll talk about the Zed in game #3 as much as I liked it in their best of 1 against WE. I did not like it here in game 3 against FPX because I think the game is not set up nearly as well for something like a Zed. Shadow was solid. He's definitely been better than he was at the beginning of the year. He had his struggles. We talked about them plenty on this channel, but he's been okay. And, you know, Junhao was okay on the other side as well, but Shadow was certainly good enough. And I was impressed with Dway over the course of this entire last chance qualifier. I think the bot lane in general played well. I think top lane was awesome. And mid jungle was solid. I think FPX was clearly the best team in this last chance qualifier. And I feel even more justified for having them at #9 in my power rankings by the end of last week. Kind of said that I thought they were the best of the rest. I didn't feel good about that take, mostly for the fact that, you know, the bottom half of the LPL is just not very good right now. I think top half, bottom half is like the biggest difference of any region in the world. There's a gigantic gap in between those two, and especially with 10 teams making Group Ascend, like there are going to be a couple of teams in there that I think get demolished, but if there's any team in that bottom half that I think could theoretically make that transition, it's FPX, just because I think some of their players are pretty talented and definitely have upside. And then for Ultra Prime, you know, they bought themselves an extra life here by winning that best of 1 earlier on against WE, but this was not a great series overall from them. I do want to commend them for game #2 because I really, like, game #2 was awesome. They played the game basically perfectly. Their macro was excellent. They looked like a very complete team in that performance. They just couldn't close it out in game #3, and games 1 and 3 were not close, and that definitely puts a bit of a damper on it, but it's difficult to identify where exactly to give dud of the series because of that. I think if you were just looking at the all-important game #3, it would be Jiang who would get dud of the series here for Ultra Prime, but he was so good on the Camille in game #2 that I can't even really justify that. I'm going to give dud of the series to Wacko in the bot lane. Like I said, a pretty big 80 carry gap in my opinion in this one. Wacko has not been what I thought he would be. This is a guy who's played internationally before coming out of the PCS, and he has just not been good at all for Ultra Prime. I'm not going to say he's been a disaster, but at best, he's been a non-factor for Ultra Prime, allowing Junhao, Saber, Xiaoxia to be able to win a lot of these games. And at worst, like, this is the worst series that he's played. These are the worst games that he's played, and this is the biggest moment that he needed to step up. And so it's not really been a great show of things in my opinion for Wacko. Hopefully he can get better. Him and Xiaoxia don't really seem to have any 2v2 chemistry. Xiaoxia's big, like, acquisition and upgrade to this team has been enabling Junhao and Saber in the middle of the map. This 2v2 does not look particularly good, and I think that could hold them back, but Junhao was also not nearly as effective here. He gets the Neferi taken away from him in game #1, which he's not really able to answer all that easily with the Poppy, and then the Lily is just not able to take over the game. But we have to talk about Saber in game #3. This is not the Zed game that you are looking for. Like, I understand that Zed worked against WE, and Zed is a champion that I think snowballs really effectively and can be really strong at this level. The problem is, this is not the draft to play Zed into. What the draft we saw earlier that they did pick Zed into was a really good one. You had things like Talia and, you know, Ezreal that you could just one-shot, and, you know, jungle wasn't going to be able to salvage or protect a lot of them. Like, Zed's dive was really well accentuated by the rest of the team, by the Neferi, by the Kai'Sa. In this game, you just have Zed. You don't really have any good targets because you're playing into Yone, who you can't really beat 1v1. Their jungler is a Sejuani. You can't blow that up. Draven is going to be fully protected throughout this game. Like, there's not a lot of good targets for the Zed already, and you don't really have any dive elsewhere on this team besides, like, Renekton Leona. Like, you're not going to dive that if you're the Zed, and so it's just a little bit difficult to imagine a world where this champion is ever relevant in game number 3, and I think it really cost them. Like I said, Jiang was definitely outplayed in the all-important game 3 by Sheer. Ultra Prime just didn't look like they were on the same level when they needed to be against FPX, and if that's going to be the case, obviously that's not a great look. This is a team that starts strong and finishes weak. We've seen that not only now over the course of this year, but we saw that over the course of last summer as well, when they were looking really good in Group D and then completely collapsed and ended up as a team that was in Group Nirvana and was dangerously low in like the back half of the Group Nirvana standings. Like, it just wasn't a good look. Hopefully Ultra Prime can keep their momentum up, because I did think they looked really good at the beginning of the placement stage, but they still can get into Group Ascend. They're just going down to the lower bracket now, to the lower bracket finals. That final qualification series, they'll take on the winner of LGD and WE later on. But for FPX, they are done with this last chance qualifier. They just needed 4 games in order to get themselves into Group Ascend. They were clearly the best team in the last chance qualifier, which is really important. Sheer looks like an absolute monster. Asum and Jue do look like a pretty stable and competent bot lane, and Shadow and Kara are stabilizing in the middle of the map, even if they're not main characters for this team. FPX has some interesting things going on, but they still have a ways to go to be considered top 8. But now moving on to our lower bracket, and this is technically our first elimination series of the last chance qualifier. It's LGD Gaming taking on Team WE. And shockingly, Team WE is going to pick up the victory, not only just winning the series, but winning both of these games, not dropping a single game. I did not expect this outcome. I did not expect LGD to underperform in the way that they did. There were a couple of players that I think just did not have very good tournaments, if you will, good weeks, whatever you want to call it. It just wasn't a good look for LGD. I think they kind of returned to normalcy here, if you will, in terms of how they ended up playing over the course of this, entire stretch. But WE stepping up when it matters the most. This team has gotten better going into spring. They are definitely better with Monkey in than they were with Tianjin in before they made the change, and I'm not entirely surprised to say that. I was actually hyping up Monkey, not this year, but last year. I wasn't hyping him up this year because I just had no hype for WE at all, but when you looked at my reviews for a lot of Group Nirvana and just generally what EDG was doing last year, Monkey was a player that I was impressed by from a feast or famine perspective, because his good games looked so good and his bad games looked so bad. I thought if you could channel some of that into some more consistency, he could be a really effective player, but I did not expect him to completely take over a series like this. He has been a gigantic upgrade to Tianjin here and to just what WE wants to do. We said it in the primer. If this team is going to win a lot of games, it was probably going to be through Monkey being a primary carry option. That is exactly how they've won basically every single game across this split. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the series is obviously Monkey. Like, you don't need me to tell you that. He plays the Neferi in game number 1. This champion looks basically unbeatable. I'm not saying that it is unbeatable. I think it's pretty darn close. If you're not banning Neferi, I think you're actually wasting time. There are not a lot of things in the game that can actively counter it. I get, like, Neferi for Gwen or Neferi for Kalista can feel like a pretty good trade right now in the current meta, but I just don't think it is. Neferi feels like it's way too strong, and Monkey looks great on it in game 1, but Monkey took over in game 2 on the Viego as well. It's not like it's, oh, he got strong champion, therefore he ends up winning the game. He did it on, a champion that not a lot of people are playing at a super high level right now, and he was able to completely carry it. So credit to Monkey. Again, his good games look so good when he's able to win. Even when he was able to win on EDG last year, like, it looked really solid. It's just he's not consistent as a player at all. So I'm glad to see that at least something is going right for WE, because this team is really funny. And, I said this at the beginning of the year, but I'm like kind of cheering for them because this is one of the funniest rosters that has ever been put together, in my opinion, for them to be able to pick up a win here and kind of move on to that next round, be one best of 3 away from qualifying to Group Ascend. That's a pretty funny place for them to be, but it was everybody else as well. I think Taiyun and Vampire are starting to stabilize. Not, I wouldn't say as a good bot lane. They were solid in this series, but as just, like, not a bad bot lane or not the worst bot lane in the league. Vampire is definitely getting better as a player. I'm glad to see that progression is definitely coming in. One of the big problems with Vampire is that he was thrust into action way too quick on EDG. They lose Mako at the beginning of the year last year to Top Esports, and they don't really have a replacement lined up because it's so late into the offseason, so they just have to thrust a guy who's barely played any competitive in there. Vampire was awful year 1, and he goes to Invictus. He continues to be awful. He goes over here to WE. People are going to talk about some of the upside games. It's sometimes there, but, his stability is getting better, and I think that's the important part. I don't need to see the flashes of brilliance. I need to see that he can play well game in and game out. That's been the problem for Vampire, and it's starting to get better in that regard. Taiyun was okay in this series. There have been some games this split that he has not been okay. I think Taiyun is just one of those players that you have to hope the rest of the map is going right. Cube definitely played his best series in quite a while here. Sasi was not good at all, and we'll talk about that. And Karis wasn't a problem in the middle of the map. Again, when you put him on facilitators, I think he definitely feels a bit better as a shove and roam player. player than he does when he has to play carries. I think he's definitely a lot more comfortable in this role, which is nice, and he was definitely the less egregious mid laner, even if he was the player that impressed me the least on WE in this series. But Monkey as the hard carry, and then Cube and Typhoon and Vampire kind of stepping it up and being good enough, especially in comparison to their opponents on the other side, to be able to push WE forward. It's a big win for them. I didn't expect them to pick up a win here, and they did. And then for LGD, you know, I think this is more of what they should have been the entirety of the year. This was a team that obviously beat WE early on in Group A in winter, and so I kind of expected that to continue here, but man, it's just mistake after mistake for this team. You can sit here and talk about Saucy being by far the weaker of these two top laners, which is really disappointing considering how bad Cube has been over the past couple of years. Climber playing one of his weaker series in a while. Xiaoya and YCX were, I guess, generally fine. We'll get to that, but dud of the series kind of has to go to Zhao Qinghua once again. For me, in the mid lane, I talk about this a lot on the channel, and longtime viewers of the channel will recognize this phrase, but he was infected by the mind virus that is LEC Azir syndrome. That's what I call it when you have an Azir player who feels like he has to be the primary, you know, engaged threat with a Shuriman Shuffle instead of, oh, I don't know, taking a hyper carry and just doing damage with him on the backline. Like, it's a mental illness. Like, I don't know what else to say. People just get poisoned into this idea that, oh, I have to go in, I have to make the big play. If I'm not, you know, trying to Shuriman Shuffle people, then I'm not playing Azir right. And then you're not putting out any damage. Like, I just can't justify what Zhao Qinghua did in game number 2. It's one of the worst Azir games I've seen all year long. Like, it actively lost his team the game, and I'm tired of players feeling like they have to be, you know, playmakers on Azir. You don't have to do that. You can do that. That's one of the cool things about Azir, is that you have so many different options. It's the reason he's been, like, the #1 pro play mid laner of all time. Like, him and Orianna are the unstoppables. They're going to be in every single meta. Maybe Talia's kind of in there now until the day that, you know, Riot Games goes out of business. There's just never going to be a time where those champs aren't relevant. And one of the big reasons for Azir is that he is good at everything. He can lane against, you know, weaker laning champions. He can definitely poke out. He has a lot of damage early. He just isn't very consistent in that regard, but his late game, you know, hyper carry ability is top notch. He's able to front to back really effectively. He does have playmaking opportunities. He has really good gank assist. He's a good skirmisher. Like, he's just good in all phases of the game. But when you completely throw away half of those things in order to focus on one of them, in this case, playmaking, you just give up why that champion is good in the first place. And Zhao Qinghua, I think, played awful. He absolutely deserves dud of the series, and quite frankly, he threw away LGD's chance to get into Group Ascend. And I feel bad because, you know, he's been playing a lot worse than he was in winter, and that's just a disappointing place to be. Like I said, Saucy also kind of got blasted on the top side. He was not nearly good enough on both Gwen and Ambessa, which is never a great sign. Climber was not nearly as good as Monkey, and, you know, even if he wasn't the worst player on the team, I don't think he was doing enough. The bot lane was okay. Again, Typhoon and Vampire aren't exactly the strongest 2v2 to have to go into, and so I'm not surprised to see the 2v2 at least go okay for them, but LGD just kind of had some chances and threw it away themselves. They lost this series. WE won it and LGD lost it. I think that's the fair way to kind of say things. So LGD is going to go down to Group Nirvana now. They're the first team in this last chance qualifier to technically be eliminated from it and go down into Group Nirvana. Remember, bottom 2 in Group Nirvana are done not only for spring, but for summer as well. So Group Nirvana is a very scary place to be, especially with it being single round robin. And then for WE on the other side, they have their hopes alive. They have one more best of 3 to play against Ultra Prime to see who's going to be moving on as that second team to Group Ascend, but who knows, if Monkey can take over a game like this, maybe they're going to be able to do the impossible and actually get themselves into the top 10. But we're going to find out right now who that final team will be in Group Ascend, who the final team in Group Nirvana will be. It's a matchup between Ultra Prime and Team WE, and WE is going to pick up the victory in a 2-1 series win. Absolutely ridiculous that this team is in Group Ascend, but as I hope to coin a lot more throughout the year, I don't think I will, but as I hope to coin, when WE win, we win. It's absolutely insane to see this team in the top 10 at the current moment. Ultra Prime should feel really disappointed, not only because they beat WE early on in, you know, the day before in a best of 1, and over the course of this last chance qualifier, these 2 days, they were 2-2 against WE, and somehow that puts them in Group Nirvana, and that's kind of an unfortunate set of circumstances, but because once again, Ultra Prime collapses at the finish line. They just can't get across it. They start so strong. Once again, in the spring split, in the placements, they go 2-1, and they're in second place in their own group to start the stage, and then they go 0-3 in the second half of the week on the second day of their group stage to put themselves in a tiebreaker. They're lucky enough to be able to win that that tiebreaker, but they finally get to a stage where they're one win away, where they just have to win a best of 3 against either FPX or WE to get into Group Ascend, and they can't do it. It's the important games. Like, people talk about top esports being international underperformers and international chokers. Ultra Prime is domestic chokers. Any gigantic game this org has ever had, they just instantly lose it. It's absolutely absurd, but we'll talk about them when we get to their segment. Let's talk about WE. I'm super pumped that this team now, for the rest of the spring split, is going to be facing off against the best teams in the LPL over and over and over again. Like, no easy games left for WE. What a circumstance to find themselves in, and off the back of my player of the series, Taiyun. Yes, it is Scrim Taiyun finally showing up on stage for maybe the first time ever. He was awesome, specifically in game number 2 on the Ezreal, easily the best game anyone played across this entire series, but he still was really good in game 3 on the Kai'Sa. It's not like his performances let the team down anywhere else. This was just a really good showing from Taiyun and from Vampire, who I think also was really good in this series. This is the best that this bot lane has played all year long, and it's not even particularly close. Again, Vampire is starting to develop some semblance of consistency because he just hasn't had that at all throughout the year, but if Taiyun's going to be anything other than the worst player in the LPL, maybe this bot lane can be okay. Now, I don't think that's going to extend well going forward, at least in the spring split, because now they're just going to be facing the best bot lanes in the LPL over and over again, which I don't think is a great circumstance for them, but at least for now, Wacko and Xiaoxiao were definitely the weaker of these two bot lanes, and man, I'm concerned about Wacko, but we'll get into that in a second. Karis was really good in game 3 on the Sylas, wasn't super standout in the first couple of games, which is why I'm not really considering him for player of the series, but definitely was awesome on the Sylas. Cuban Monkey had good and bad moments. Monkey stepped up when it mattered, but a lot of this series he wasn't actually particularly good. Junhao was definitely better on the other side, just as he was the first time these two teams played off against each other, and Cube was the weaker of these two top laners. I feel pretty confident in saying that, but if the bot lane is going to show up, and if they're going to be the lane that ends up being better here, that's ginormous for WE, and regardless of how they did it, regardless of how they got there, they're in Group Ascend. They win 2 best of 3s back-to-back to get themselves into the top 10, and that's something we just thought wasn't going to be possible. And then for Ultra Prime on the other side of this, it's just once again another collapse in such an important moment. This organization just can't find anything in terms of domestic consistency. They look so good at the start of these splits, and they're never able to keep that momentum up. I think that there are a couple of players that are pretty obvious to point to in this one. The bot lane just wasn't good enough. Xiaoxiao is going to get dud of the series here for me, but both Wacko and Xiaoxiao were not particularly good here. Absolutely needed to be better. They're going into what me and basically everybody else is considering the worst bot lane in the LPL, although they've had some competition in terms of bad players over the course of this split. Shout out Photic and Juo, but Wacko and Xiaoxiao fell to that, and they fell hard to that. It was not a particularly close matchup. Wacko looks unplayable at the LPL level right now. I think that there are games where he looks fine, and most of games he just looks slightly below average, but if the range of outcomes for Wacko is slightly below average at the top end, and then not very good, worst AD carry at the low end, that's not a particularly good range for Ultra Prime, and Xiaoxiao, once again, is just not a 2v2 player. That has become abundantly clear. Every single time that Xiaoxiao has found any semblance of success so far in the LPL has been when he is out of lane, moving around the map, helping Junhao, helping Saber, when those two are on hyper carries and just kind of getting them into good positions. When he has to actually try to get Wacko into a good spot, it's doomed. This guy can't play 2v2s, and so that's a disaster for Ultra Prime, and now they're headed down into Group Nirvana. Remember, Group Nirvana is kind of a scary place to be because bottom 2 in Group Nirvana is done for the year, and it's a single round robin. You play 5 best of 3s across the entire rest of the split if you're in Group Nirvana, and if you're bottom 2 across those 5 best of 3s, you're done. You don't get to play again, and so there's a lot of pressure now on this bot lane to be remotely average, and they just weren't here. Saber was really good. I don't want to blame Saber. He was definitely the best player on Ultra Prime in this series. He's really inconsistent as a player, but he had some really good moments. The Talia in game 1 was really good. Junhao was the better jungler of these two for the majority of this series. Jiang actually was pretty interesting in these games. The Camille is strong for him, and the Rumble was good in game number 1. The problem just was that the bot lane was not good enough to allow Ultra Prime the opportunity to stay in this series against Taiyun and Vampire, and that's just unacceptable. So Ultra Prime moves down to Group Nirvana. We will talk about that in the preview at the end of this, but WE WWE is moving up to Group Ascend. Now they have to play the best teams in the LPL over and over again. They could be this year's version of LGD where they just get smacked around over and over and over again in Group Ascend because they're not good enough to be there. It's double round robin. I don't imagine that's going to go well for WE, but they're guaranteed at the very least a play-in series, and now they get a chance to play against the best teams in the LPL regularly, and they might get better. There are a lot of young players on this team. Players like Vampire and Monkey have a chance now to develop into something bigger. Who knows? Maybe Karis and Taiyun actually step up and, are relevant. Maybe they win a game or two, but I think they're going to get slaughtered in Group Ascend, and that's probably my expectation, but the fact that they are there is definitely already a good thing no matter what. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL Last Chance Qualifier overview and analysis video up on the screen. Both Group Ascend and Group Nirvana, we are entering the actual, regular season, part of the spring split here. All of this has been placements. It's been set up for Group Ascend and Group Nirvana. We have a pretty good idea of where these teams land, but again, just to remind you of the format for this next stage, if you are unfamiliar, Group Ascend is a double round robin best of 3 for every single team involved, so every team will play each other twice. The top 4 teams will immediately qualify for the playoffs. And then 5 down to 10, the teams from 5 downwards are qualified into the play-in stage. And then in Group Nirvana, the top 2 teams also qualify for that play-in stage. 3 and 4, they don't qualify for play-ins, but they're not eliminated or anything. And then 5 and 6 in Group Nirvana, they're not just eliminated from the spring split alongside the 3rd and 4th teams in Group Nirvana, but they are eliminated from the entire year. And what makes that even more dangerous is Group Nirvana, instead of being a double round robin, is a single round robin. All of these teams only play each other once. I don't really understand why the schedule ends up working this way. Ascend has so many more teams and plays so many more games. It's very, very strange, but you do not want to be a bottom 2 team in Group Nirvana, and you do want to be a top 4 team in Group Ascend to really guarantee your spot. We can see some power ranking changes because of things that have happened here at the Last Chance Qualifier. Most notably, WE is going to be moving up to number 11, but they're not jumping above Ultra Prime, who's going to stay at number 10 in my power rankings. I think Ultra Prime is a better team than WE. I just think that they didn't have it in that one best of 3. I still would expect Ultra Prime to be the better of those 2 teams, but I don't think it's by a lot. WE has climbed its way up from being the perennial number 16 in my power rankings to all the way up to number 11. And obviously they've earned it. They're in Group Ascend now, but they're pretty clearly the worst team in Group Ascend. No other major changes. LGD is going to move down to number 12 because they just did not look good. We'll talk about that more in just a second. And EDG moves down to number 13 to accommodate WE moving up to number 11. But overall, nothing else changing. Again, FPX looked really good in the Last Chance Qualifier, but they were already at number 9 in my power rankings. I have nothing to change there. So let me know what you agree with or disagree with, and let me know who you think is going to be like a bottom 2 team in Nirvana. Who do you think the top 4 teams in Group Ascend are? Do you agree with my power rankings? I'm always curious to hear your thoughts and opinions down below, but that's going to bring us into my player of the week and my dud of the week, or I guess player of the tournament and dud of the tournament, whatever you want to call it here for this small little Last Chance Qualifier. My player of the week, pretty obvious. It's going to go to Sheer, the top laner for FunPlus Phoenix. He was exceptionally good across this entire tournament. He has been this team's best player by a pretty considerable margin across this entire year. I'm excited to see where Sheer can go. I think this is the kind of player that really can be a star at this level moving forward. Remember, this kid is like 18 now. Like, he was 17 for a majority of last year when he was playing for LGD Gaming. I imagine that he still has a lot of room to grow, and there is clearly a lot of mechanical upside if they're going to be able to unlock that. So he was a pretty easy choice for player of the week. Shout out Monkey. I very much considered him because, WE does end up qualifying, but I landed on Sheer. And then my dud of the week, dud of the tournament, this was another very obvious choice. It's got to go to Zhao Qinghua, the mid laner for LGD. He threw away his team's chances of being able to qualify for Group Ascend, and honestly, it was kind of entirely his fault. I'm not going to say he was the only player on the team to play poorly. Saucy did not have a good tournament. He did not look good at all in terms of the small sample size that he played, but there was nobody who played worse than Zhao Qinghua. I feel pretty confident in saying that. So pretty easy choice for dud of the week and pretty easy choice for player of the week, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comments section below, and leave a like if you did enjoy the video. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content and helps get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We're going to be posting more about the LPL, Group Ascend, Group Nirvana every single week on this channel moving forward. So if you're interested in that, hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all